To get a handle on the scope of a biblical book, it's always helpful to look at the beginning and the end of the book, how things are set up initially and how they come to a conclusion. And you can get the feel for the movement of the book by looking at the beginning and the end. You can think of 1st and 2nd Samuel, for example, which form a single book, a single narrative. It begins with the tabernacle. Eli is the high priest. His 2 sons are defiling the tabernacle, and the Philistines steal the ark and they destroy the tabernacle that's at Shiloh. So you have a destroyed sanctuary at the beginning of the book. At the end of the book, you have this scene where David conducts a census. The Lord punishes him for that census, and he ends up purchasing a threshing floor and erecting an altar that brings an end to the plague that the Lord sends. And that doesn't look like a particularly good conclusion to the story until you realize that that threshing floor is the place where Solomon is going to build the temple. So what you've done in the course of 1st and 2nd Samuel is move from a destroyed temple at the beginning of the book, a destroyed sanctuary at the beginning of the book, to the beginnings of a reestablishment of the sanctuary at the end of the book. Kings kind of reverses that. Kings starts out with the building of the temple, but at the end of the book you have this disassembly of the temple as Nebuchadnezzar comes in and breaks down the walls of Jerusalem, and then you have a catalog of all the things that are inside the temple, but it's a catalog of the things that are being taken out rather than things that are being put in. So you can see the large scope, the large arc of the story by looking at the beginning and the end. The same thing is true of the book of Exodus. You can think about this in a number of different registers. You can think, for example, of the geographic movement of the book of Exodus. Exodus begins, of course, with Israel in Egypt. Israel is under a Pharaoh who has forgotten Joseph. They're being persecuted by that Pharaoh, and they are in slavery. By the time you get to the end of the book of Exodus, they are out of slavery. They are Mount Sinai. They get to Sinai in the middle of the book, but they're still at Sinai at the end. So there's a liberation from slavery in Egypt and a movement toward the place where they're going to make covenant with the Lord, and the Lord is going to dwell among them at Sinai. You also have a contrast between what's being built and what Israel is devoting themselves to building. At the beginning of the book, they're slaves of Pharaoh, and they're building Pharaoh's storage cities. And by the end of the book, they're not building Pharaoh's city, they're building the Lord's house. The last big chunk of the book of Exodus is about instructions for the tabernacle, and then the actual construction and fashioning of the furnishings of the tabernacle, and then Moses erects the tabernacle in the very last chapter of Exodus. So you move from Israel building as slaves for Pharaoh to Israel building as a liberated people, and they're building the Lord's house. And of course the big change is a change from the lordship of Pharaoh, who was a tyrant and a persecutor, an agent of death, who wants to kill. The Lord liberates them from that, brings them to Sinai, and then doesn't just bring them to Sinai so they can stand at the foot of his mountain and see him at a distance, but at the very end of the book he comes to live among them. So they now have a different Lord. The Lord rescued them, and now Yahweh has become the Savior, has become not only Savior but also Lord by rescuing them from the Egyptian tyrant. He's brought them to rest at Sinai, and he himself has come into rest in his house.